I'm Mary Venzel White, and this is Creative Space Chats with Writers. In these 30-minute interviews, we explore creativity and the writing life, inspiration, community, and ways to spark creativity for writers and everyone else. And today I'm pleased to welcome author Joseph Falank. Joe is the author of 4 books, with a 5th scheduled for release in September. He writes for adults and young adults and has been published in various magazines and online publications. His young adult novel, Scene, was chosen as a top book of 2014 by This Kid Reviews Books. And like most writers, he has a day job. Joe works at a middle school that provides nonviolent crisis intervention. And I'm grateful he's able to join me today from upstate New York, where he lives with his wife and 2 children. Welcome, Joe, and thank you so much for discussing creativity with me.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to our conversation. We'll probably cover several different interesting things about you, but maybe we could start with your day job. Like I said, most writers have to pay the bills some way or another, right? Can you tell me a little bit about working with young adults in this vulnerable group, and if and how this experience has perhaps influenced your writing, particularly when you create young adult characters?
Sure. So I work in the middle school setting. I work in district classrooms. My program is, we work with not just learning disabled students, but also social emotional disabilities as well. So we work with academics. Our primary focus is on the trauma and recognizing emotions and feelings that these kids are having. And we try to give them, we try to help them recognize these feelings and then how to work past them, so that eventually when they move beyond the middle school setting and go on to high school, they can be successful on their own. Working with them, I really try not to combine my work life with my home life, because they're like oil and water, 2 very different things. But from my students, I do get a lot of the authenticity, their voices, their struggles, and how they handle their emotions. So while I'm not basing anyone I have ever written on these kids, I do take little pieces here and there and create a character out of that. And yeah, that's basically what I get from my day job.
Kind of what we writers do, right, is constantly walk around with kind of a net that we're always casting out and bringing things in from experience. I know when I was working on what became a young adult novel that I wrote, it definitely was helpful that I had 4 young adults in my house to kind of remind myself. And of course I teach young adults now too, so I'll constantly have those kind of voices around me. But young adult certainly has its own specific thing, and voice, as you say, it's one of the most important things, kind of hitting that authenticity for the characters.
Absolutely. They're very helpful.
Yeah.
Even though they don't know what they're doing, they're helping me with my characters.
Right. Little do they know. And I think that one of the fun things for me too with writing young adult was it sort of brings it's amazing how much those feelings can resurface from that you had when you were younger, right? You kind of forget about them and then you start writing from a young adult perspective, and you remember all it's a very dramatic time, right? And feelings are very deep and
a lot of
tragic
anxiety.
and joyful and anxious, and everything seemed at that time of life very, very, extreme.
Yeah, it's all very heightened. And I think even more so now with social media, them having basically the world in their hands, in their pockets. We didn't have that when I was growing up.
Right. And I think even with the pandemic, one thing I've noticed, I think it's particularly harder on younger kids. We're older and I suppose more used to surviving things and just making the best of things. But for kids, my younger 3 were seniors in high school when the pandemic hit. And so it's particularly hard when you're starting out. So that, yeah, kids nowadays, they're going through a particular difficulties, as I suppose every generation does, but it's been tough on them for sure, I think. And that's why I think young adult is it's such a great genre, because it can reach kids on so many levels. you know?
Yeah, and it can be almost anything
Yeah.
anymore.
And I think the excitement about young adult and even middle grade now too is they are addressing so many different concerns that kids come into contact with, you know, so many things they deal with.
Yeah. I would not be surprised if coming soon we see more young adult, middle grade books dealing with the time that was spent at home. A lot of these kids were home 6, 7, 8 months, some even longer when they did remote learning,
Yeah.
and how that really affected them socially
Mhm.
and emotionally.
And it's funny because I've seen articles about the pandemic and are there COVID books coming out? Excuse me. And it seems like the last time I saw writing about it, the consensus was there really wasn't yet, but maybe we're too close out of it and people don't really want to read about it or talk about it yet. We're not ready yet. But I
Yeah,
think you're right. I think eventually,
yeah, I think it's coming.
yeah. So I mentioned your novel Scene, which is a young adult coming of age story about Jake, a 13-year-old who's navigating hopelessness after his father walks out. A reviewer described the story as portraying the gut-wrenching intrigue of middle school, some of which we were just discussing. You followed that novel with The Painted Lady, which is a story of suspense about Miles, who is a former artist, now widower, whose destiny is altered by the arrival of a mysterious tenant in his building. Then you return to coming of age themes in your novel, An Unexpected Visit. This story is told from the perspective of Noah, a man in his 30s, but he flashes back to his younger years and a particular turning point of his life, which was a long weekend spent in the company of his estranged father, a special forces soldier. That right there, a company of, in just that description, you know, being in the company of, I think when you say special forces soldier, it brings up a certain type perhaps, right? And then your novella Disconnected is another suspense story that I recently read, this time dealing with a family taking an unplugged vacation, which definitely speaks to our current times with
Mhm.
technology. And this family is in the Southern Adirondacks when they become involved in an unexpected series of events, which I think as a reading experience certainly took readers by surprise too, which was great. That twist sort of when it kind of turned from perhaps one sort of book into something else. Can you talk about genre? Some of these seem to straddle genre and age categories. Is this something you consider? Do you consider these aspects before writing something new?
So when I start out to write something, my first thought is, what do I want to write about? There's something in each of those books that I got an idea for first. Like for Seeing, I thought of a boy running a race. That was my first thought. And then I kind of had to backtrack. Well, why is he running this race? And then I got the idea he's running towards something. Okay, what's he running towards? Well, what if he's running towards something he can't see? Or I'm sorry, that he can see, but nobody else can. So it's like the what if. All right. So then I just built the story leading up to that moment. And so I guess you could say, okay, well, that kind of goes into like the supernatural genre. But I don't think of genre at all. I just try to think of a story and how I want to tell it, whether it's suspenseful, supernatural, funny, heartbreaking. If I can include all of it, that's great. But I don't necessarily set out to write one thing because I feel
Hmm.
like that's very limiting. I want something that's accessible to everybody. Anyone can read and go, oh, I really like this. And hopefully that will be the thing that really sticks with them. Painted Lady, I wanted to write about art coming to life. And with um, An Unexpected Visit, I wanted to write about communication between a broken family. And then with Disconnected, it was about communication being kind of broken because the family is having difficulty. So their communication isn't uh, syncing with each other. But then they also cannot communicate with the outside world because of where they are. There's no signal for them to call for help as things progress in the story. So yeah, I'm thinking about what it is that I want to write about, but I'm not thinking about genre at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. My next question was going to have what you sort of already answered because it had to do with Where does that creative spark begin? And it sounds like for you, it begins with sort of maybe theme and or story, some idea for something that's going to happen, but then a couple of the things that you discussed for books, it was more like an idea that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Would you say that's fair? Theme and or story?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I want to tackle something important. And so when I start, it's, okay, I got this idea, this is what I want to do. All right, well, what does that mean? What's going to be the meaning of the whole book? What's going to be the takeaway? So I kind of build all around that first before I get into the characters or their setting or the plot, because if it's something that I don't feel anything for, then I don't want to write it.
That makes sense. And it's interesting, when I teach writing, theme and voice are always kind of the two sticky things. It's kind of easy to break down some suggestions for how to go about plot or character. But when it comes to theme, either I wish I wrote like you, honestly. I mean, I think that inwardly I do have some kind of idea of what it's going to be about, but for me, it starts more with maybe character or even setting. And I feel like I have to kind of work my way around realizing what my theme was. It kind of was there, but it takes me a while, I think, to realize. So it must
we all
be
do it differently.
Yeah, everybody does. I mean, it must feel nice to know right away what you're writing about. Does it ever change as you're kind of halfway through, or do you focus in? Because like you say, communication, and then does that become like a focusing process?
So I try to think of it on like different levels. So like with Disconnected, it was, well, I know I wanted a family who was having trouble with communication. So, okay, well, then they're also, let's put them out somewhere where they also cannot communicate with their devices. So it's like it kind of hits on two levels. So then I'm inspired. So it's like, okay, I feel like I have a really good idea, something that will carry me through a couple hundred pages. Because if I just want to write about, well, person A is going to meet person B, and eventually they're going to bond, or whatever's going to happen with them. Okay, that's great. How far is that really going to carry me? It's not going to get me very far if I don't know what it's all going to encompass in the end. So I guess I'm looking at the bigger picture first, so that I feel more confident that I can write it.
And it sounds like it's more interesting to you that way too, obviously, because I think we've all started to write something and then maybe at some point realized it really, well, not you because you plan, but I have started to write something and then at some point kind of realized it really wasn't about much.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I have all the fixings. Well, I want to include this in the plot and then this character. I'm thinking of my young adult novel that I wrote, actually. It started out being something else. I had all the fixins, but at some point I couldn't find not only my personal connection to it, but what's it about? What's that bigger thing that's going to connect with people and make it memorable? Because we all love a good story, and good events and car chases or whatever. But unless there's some fundamental universal thing, I don't think it has as much power.
But then also sometimes you want to leave it open too, because I think a lot of readers like to get their own thing out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you tell them too much, oh, this is exactly what it's about, they're like, okay, well, I got that just from you telling me. I don't need to read it anymore.
Yeah. And we didn't kind of talking about this, but it kind of leads me to thinking about communication. And this book that I just had come out last week was written, the time frame of the book is 1999. And there's a comfort in that because you can have certain plot things like for those younger listeners, we didn't have cell phones. So you couldn't just always find someone or contact someone. And sometimes you had a voicemail and you just had to wait for them to call you again. And I remember at some point, as we kind of transitioned into having all this technology, of thinking about how that does affect fiction, because like I said, you can't just have these waiting periods. But do you want to have too much cell phones or social media, and particularly in young adult? Like it seems to me, if it's set in the current time, you sort of have to address it because it's a big part of everyone's life.
It's a really big difficulty too, and it kind of like you said, communication's right there in your hand. I'm stuck on the side of the road. Oh, I can just call for help. I can call AAA. I can call 911.
No drama in that. Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, that's over with,
Yeah. Do you feel like if you're writing younger characters, it has to be kind of a part of things? Technology, social media, all the stuff that takes up a big portion of most young adults' lives. Well, even adults.
Well, okay. So in writing the now with 5 books coming out, I've really tried not to narrow it down to a specific time other than Disconnected. Disconnected was purposely to talk about not having that communication, but I really try not to narrow it down to a specific time, because then you do have to address, oh, well, in 2021 we had this and this and this and this and this, and we already dealt with COVID in a way. And so I really try not to zero in on a specific point in time.
Yeah,
but then
that's smart, I think.
I'm also always like, so I don't have a specific way that I do writing. I wish I could say, oh, I sit down and I write 6 pages a day. It doesn't work like that for me.
Yeah.
But I do have certain parameters that I follow. I like to have a very limited amount of characters, a very limited number of settings, so that I can focus on all that stuff. And how does technology work into the bubble that I've created for these stories? So sometimes, like with Disconnected, I didn't have to worry about, well, they can just pick up their phone and call for help and it's all over with. Well, okay, but let's put them out in the middle of nowhere where that's not a possibility. And then I don't even have to deal with the cell phone issue at all.
Yeah, and I think any of us, there was such a nice element of tension in that book right from the beginning. And I think part of it was just being a modern person. And when the couple said, especially, having children, like that there weren't going to be phones, I think that already kind of struck a little bit of a terror. Like, what are they going to do? How are the kids going to behave? Right. That kind of started the tension for me anyway, the little cold sweat.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that was based on a real vacation, not the whole thing, not the whole story.
Oh,
but,
good.
My family and I, we went to a house out in the Adirondacks where we wouldn't have use of our phones, and we're out there like, this is really strange. This is a very like unsettling feeling. I'm looking at my phone, it says no service, I don't get anything on it. And that's kind of where the idea spawned from, was like, well, what if like this sort of thing happened to a family? And my wife didn't want to hear anything about it. She was like, nope, I'll read it when it's done.
Not now. Yeah, it's not a pleasant thing to think about. Yeah. It was such a great element of tension that went through that whole book, or novella. It definitely was. Let's talk about, we've kind of gone around it a little bit, like different types of creativity. Of course, the ongoing thing with writing community is, are you a planner, or do you go by the seat of your pants? Do you think that, and that's a method, we can talk about method, but do you think that people do have different types of creativity even within, well, not necessarily even within a writing practice, but are there different types? What am I trying to say? Does creativity come to different people in different ways?
I think creativity comes to all of us in different ways. Like, someone who cooks dinner has to prepare it and make it look nice on the plate. So that's creativity. What ingredients do they want to toss in? That's creativity. How do we dress ourselves in the morning? Creativity. I think everything is creative. So when someone says that they're not creative, I don't believe them.
Right.
They're creative. They're just not thinking about it that way.
Yeah. And even in the cooking, I mean, my mind goes, even in the cooking example, I can cook, but I'm very structured about, I have to have a recipe. And then you do have the people that are more improvisational, which we're going to talk about that. Tell me what you told me the other day when we were first meeting online about your kids and how they're different types of creatives that you observe.
So my daughter is very much a planner. When she wants to play with her Barbies, it's not just taking her Barbies out and playing with them. She takes out her Barbies, she sets them up, and she's going to play a very specific game with them. Maybe she's going to play school with them. Well, it's not just, all right, we're going to play school, we're going to go to our classes. No, she will write down on a piece of paper their entire schedule. She'll do math class with them. She'll do English class. And just the setup in itself.
Oh no, she's going to be a teacher.
I hope so.
It's a wonderful job. I'm kidding. Yeah.
And but she'll spend 45 minutes just in the setup. And when she asks my wife and I to play with her, we're kind of like, yeah, we get it. We were kind of like that in a way. Yeah, it's like, come on, let's get to the play. Let's start playing. She's
This
doing
is
all
all
the,
set up.
yeah, it's all
Yeah.
set up. As to where my son is like, he'll go get his Thomas trains and he'll start playing with them, and he does the voices, he talks like them, he creates stories playing with them, that's how I was when I was a kid. I would get my action figures and I would tell stories with them. I would do their voices. I would basically like recreate the episodes that I saw on TV. So, but I'm also the planner. Like when I do my writing, I plan it all out. I need to know not every single piece of the story, but I need to know, all right, I'm going to get to the ending that is it's going to satisfy me as the writer. So hopefully
Mhm.
this will satisfy the reader, because if I'm going to spend 2 years on an idea, I need to know I'm going to at least make myself happy.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they're totally, my two kids are totally different when it comes to their style of play and how they do things. One's the planner, the other one's the pantser.
Yeah. And like we're saying, everyone's not necessarily one thing or the other, and perhaps in different practices, you're going to be one way and another. I mean, in my case, from book to book, it's one thing or another, and there's no book that starts or is planned exactly the same. I think even for planners,
Well,
right?
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I'm the same way. I guess if when people who don't write ask me, well, how do you do it? Well, the short
You mean
answer,
this time?
yeah, the short answer is I do it. The long answer is, well, I did it this way this time. I did it
Right.
this other time.
And then sometimes you think, well, that seemed to work on that book. Maybe I do that again. And then you're like, no, it didn't work.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's somewhat organic. Depends on the project, depends on what you're trying to, like you say, what you're trying to communicate,
yeah,
what you see the final project being, et cetera. So you feel like creativity has always been a part of your life?
absolutely. So um, when I was in high school, I wrote stories, but I never thought I would be a novelist. Stephen King is a novelist. I'm not a novelist. That was my idea. Like I would see a book and yeah, that's great. That's not going to be me. There's no way I can do that. So I did different things. I loved actually performing on stage, but I didn't like scripts. I really got involved with improv. So I did for a number of years after I got out of college. I did comedy improv, just like you would see on Whose Line Is It Anyway? Which some people are terrified by the idea. They're like, wait, you got up on stage and you just made it up. You didn't know what you were going to do. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I think so related to creativity because you're literally, there's no planning there. I feel like, did you feel like doing improv like that? I feel like it would just really tap into direct line, main line to your creative muscle because there's none of the trappings. You can't plan, you can't think.
No, and really the only ideas that you have in your head when you start is, okay, I have to begin the story, and you never start at the beginning. You always start where it's interesting, but you know you have to build and come to an ending, and you have to do it quickly because you only have a few minutes to do it. You go on too long, and the audience is like, oh, it's funny maybe, but it's getting boring, it's dragging out. So
Right.
you gotta keep their interest, and you gotta be done. So when you start, you're already thinking, okay, I gotta get to the ending.
And you say it's comedy improv, so there's that added pressure of trying to be funny.
Yeah, uh, I
I mean,
used to.
do you think comedy is just sort of ingrained in improv because of what it
I think
is, or no?
I think with improv, it's actually a little easier to be funny because the audience is already primed. They're there. They know you're making it up. They know you want to be funny. They're ready.
They
They
want to
they
laugh.
yeah, they don't want to come to critique it. They don't want to come to boo. They don't want to come to be bored or disappointed. They want to come and be part of it.
Mhm. Yeah, I could see where they'd be very ready. It's like an audience that goes to stand-up comedy, and you still have to make them laugh, but they're certainly there because they want to laugh. So
Yes.
you have that going for you. You did that for a long time, the improv. How did you work that in with your regular schedule? I mean, did you feel it was just like a hobby, like anyone had? Did that dovetail with you beginning to write?
So I did it when I started doing it was back in like 2004, and at that time, other than work, that was all I did. I didn't really write so much then because, like I said, I did the writing in high school. I did a little bit in college. And while I was getting praise for it from teachers and professors, it just didn't feel like that was how I was going to make it, because it felt too lofty. Like I said, Stephen King writes books. I don't write books. Who am I? So I thought, well, maybe my avenue is going to be improv. So I did that for a long time, and began to notice, okay, things are changing. I'm getting older. Not like I was 31 when my first book came out, so I wasn't old at all.
Right.
But it was like, it's time to start. I guess it was that mature mind, like, okay, I need to figure out what it is I'm going to do. And it was a conversation with my wife. It was, some people say I'd be a great teacher. Some people say I can do this. But if I really wanted to pick what I want to do, I want to write books. So she gave me a notebook and a pen, and that's when I started making notes, and I wrote Seeing in that notebook. So then it was that change, probably about 7 years into my comedy improv career, that I decided, no, comedy improv is great right now, but I want to write books.
It's funny. I feel like most writers will either tell you, oh, I always knew. Or they have a story like that where they kind of somewhere always knew, but just it was in their face, but they wouldn't acknowledge it. It sounds like it was always back there for you, but you just kind of denied it for yourself until it kind of hit you in the face. And then you're like, oh yeah, well, that's what I want to do.
Yeah, it was like, well, I can kind of make my mark on the world doing comedy improv, but what about like 80 years from now when I'm not around, but there will be a book with my name on it on somebody's shelf. I thought, yep, that's it. That's what I want to do.
What about the element of control? Because with improvisation, you're obviously improvising, and that's within a certain framework. I'm assuming like on the show, you get prompts and things, but with a book, you get to be the controller of everything, the situator of everything.
Right. I'm not really a control freak, but I will say that when it comes to writing, I do love that. I do love that I get to tell.
You have to be for a book. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that I control the story. And, when someone's done reading and they're like, oh my gosh, I loved it, it made me cry. It's like, that's all me. I don't want to say like I'm gloating or anything, but it's like, yeah, that was all me. That feels
I did that. Yeah.
You do that?
Yeah. It's a lonely thing being a writer, but it's something you keep control of it. You own it. It's 100% you.
Yep.
Okay. I have to get in Rod Serling really quick. Okay. So for the viewers, Joe lives in Binghamton, New York, which is Rod Serling's hometown, which is intriguing to me, of course. And I've been thinking about it. And as I told you, I watched one of the old Twilight Zones the other day, one of his famous ones that's commemorated in your little downtown area, right? Mm-hmm. And I was sometimes actually, when I'm teaching flash fiction, I talk about Twilight Zone because I feel like those episodes have a little bit of kind of what's in Flash, a little, sometimes there's a twist at the end or a total restructuring or shifting of kind of the situation. Talk about that. Do you agree with me? What do you think we can take from Twilight Zone and Rod Serling, who of course was brilliant in terms of writing craft?
Oh boy.
You haven't had time to think about this. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So I think for me, like what I really took from Rod Serling's Twilight Zone was that his stories it wasn't one thing, which wasn't horror. It wasn't just sci-fi. It wasn't just one thing. He wrote, like, there were episodes that were like Westerns or space exploration. So it was not one thing, but it followed a very specific formula. Like you said, you get the twist ending at the end, or something that turns what you just saw completely on its head. And, clearly, like it's stood the test of time. We still talk about the Twilight Zone now. They still put marathons of it on. So clearly it really spoke to a lot of people. And even like, I mean, yeah, he's from here, and that really just inspired my writing to I don't want one thing, and I want it to be supernatural and be funny and be touching, but also be thrilling. So I think he was just watching him when I was really young, really influenced the kind of stories that I want to be a part of.
I feel like it did. That's why I asked that.
Yeah,
So I felt like, Disconnected was like that. It wasn't just one thing. And you told me today about theme and how that drives your work. And I think that's one of the things with Twilight Zone too, is why it does stay and stay, is because even though those episodes, even some of the more silly ones, they're still about some fundamental human thing usually
right.
that makes you think or consider.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. You have another novel coming out in September. Can you tell us about Renewal?
Yes. So Renewal comes out September 13th. It's going to be published by BHC Press. It's what I call an adult coming of age. And
Hmm.
I consider that there are two coming of ages in our lifetime. The first one is when we are younger and we are kind of coming into our own. We're understanding what the world is a little bit more, what our place is in it.
Mhm.
But then I think there's also a second one where, a lot of us have the lifeline of our parents. Something goes wrong, even if we know how to take care of it, we're like, yeah, dad, I had a flat tire today. And you say, oh, well, I took care of it. And he's like, oh, I'm so proud. We have that lifeline. And in this story, the main character's name is Malcolm. When we meet him, he has not spoken to his family in a number of years. He had a falling out, which
Mhm.
you learn more about. And his father is struggling with what we learn now is the end stages of Alzheimer's.
Mm.
So there's the issues of the father losing his identity and his memory, and that's all terrifying in its own right. But now, so Malcolm has to he basically has to figure out, how am I going to navigate the world without both my parents? So it's that second coming of age where he doesn't have that lifeline, that safety net. That's eventually going to happen to him. So how does he react to the world now? Where does he fit?
Yeah, having gone through that, it's a tough one. Yeah. I think you eloquently put it, and I'll be thinking about that for a long time after we sign off today. But yeah, an adult coming of age. I like the thought of that, and there's other books I can think of that seem that way too, because the themes that we talk about with young adult are everything you talked about. Learning who you are, identity, where do you fit in the world, and when you have that ballast, that anchor of your whoever they are, older people in your life that guided you,
Mhm.
it's comforting, and there's a anchoring with that. But then once that's gone, um, it's another coming of age, as you say.
And we become that role for our kids.
Hmm. Yeah, and it things shift, right? Things are
Yeah,
always shifting and
things are always
rearranging.
shifting.
Yeah. Um, I think we're about at the 30 minutes. I have one final question for you. Finish the following sentence. If I didn't have creativity in my life,
Well, I would have creativity. As we said, creativity exists in all ways, whether it's what shoes we're going to put on, what hat we're going to put on, um, what food we're going to make. Creativity is everywhere. If I was someone who I didn't look at life that way, and if I didn't have creativity, I don't really know what else I would have. I think creativity is what drives a lot of us to do the things that we do, how we do them.
yeah, and I think too, creativity is a lot about choices we make, not just doing things, but even choices we make of how to look at things, or how
Yeah.
to survive things, or how to move forward after certain things, like your character in your book you're talking about. There's a creativity to just continuing to live, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It was super fun. The 30 minutes always flies by. We could probably keep talking about any number of those things.
Well, I would be glad to come back at some other point.
Great. And I wish you the best with your book, and I will certainly be looking out for it as well.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.